Chapter 1137. When he arrived, the central square of the illusory immortal city was already in chaos. Flowing lights fluttered about like countless blooming fireworks, and figures flew off in all directions. There were even white pieces of paper that surged with the wind in the sky but refused to descend for a long time, and people would occasionally fly over and grab them away. Chaos. Chaos. The entire hallucinatory immortal city was filled with exclamations like boiling water. Whether flying in the sky or running on the ground, as long as they were in a hurry, they would all have a white flyer in their hands. The bustling and crowded plaza instantly became much sparser. What was left was a bunch of wandering cultivators holding flyers in their hands. They didn't belong to any sect, so they didn't need to report anything to anyone. Yu Qianqiu, who arrived late, was very satisfied with this result. This was the result he wanted. He flashed into the plaza and walked to the side of the sighing wandering cultivators. He cupped his fists and pointed at the chaos around him. "Everyone, I don't know what happened. How did it cause such a big commotion? It's you. I know you." One of them suddenly pointed at Yu Qianqiu and exclaimed. Yu Qianqiu looked at him and was startled. Before he could react, the other cupped his fists and smiled. Did Sire forget? When the Merchant Alliance was attacked by Heartless Palace's consecrator Fang Yi, you also asked me a question. He pointed at the former location of the Merchant Alliance. So that's how you know you gave me a fright. Yu Qianqiu made an "oh" sound and immediately reacted. Recalling that he pulled someone over to ask a question back then, he slapped his forehead and said with a smile, I remember. What a coincidence. I didn't expect to be asked about you again." He pointed at the surroundings and asked, "What happened?" When the others heard this, they all sighed and shook their heads. That person handed the flyer to Yu Qianqiu and said, "I don't know if it's true or not. If it's true, it will be very troublesome." Yu Qianqiu pretended to take the flyer and recited the content as if he knew it by heart. The three realms are in an emergency. Jin Tai and Bai Qi were unwilling to accept defeat. They were about to reopen the sealed passage to the demon world and release the demons led by Demon King Three Knight to invade the three realms. The world was in danger. I hope that the heroes of the immortal and netherworld will put aside their personal grudges and work together to quickly defend the 74 passageways leading to the demon world. Do not let Jin Tai and Bai Qi's plot succeed, otherwise the demon path will wreak havoc in the three realms, and everyone will be in a precarious situation. Yu Qianqiu weeps blood and laments. After he finished reading, he flicked the flyer in his hand and handed it back. He looked at the others and said, "Can this be trusted? I heard that Yu Qianqiu is in cahoots with Qintai. This is a serious matter. I'd rather believe it than not." That person took the flyer, looked at the plaza that had already become sparsely populated, and said, "If it's true, then the three realms will probably flow with rivers of blood. The demon lord of Three Knights will lead a group of demons here with resentment, and I'm afraid it's unavoidable that the three realms will be bathed in blood. He'll destroy all of the original major powers and then establish a new order of the three realms under his rule. Think about it. If the demon path returns to the three realms and Demon King Three Knight doesn't allow his subordinates to obtain any benefits, he won't be able to give his subordinates who have been imprisoned in the demon world for so many years." Exactly. Another person on the side nodded in agreement. He said, "For us wandering cultivators, it's not a big deal. Demon King Three Knight can't possibly kill everyone. If he really dares to do that, he'll definitely force everyone to unite and fight to the death. That'll be enough to make them suffer. What's more, the demon realm will have to leave some people behind to do the hard work. So as long as we don't get involved, us wandering cultivators will at most have to live a more difficult and lowly life in the future. What I'm really worried about are the famous sects that have taken over region. Those people are used to being high and mighty. If you make them become dogs, it'll be more painful than killing them." The loud talk here immediately attracted some of the rogue cultivators in the surroundings to join in, and they repeatedly expressed their agreement when they heard this. Yu Qianqiu looked around at the crowd and sneered in his heart. These people are really smart. They are really used to being dogs. But then again, when the immortal realm and the netherworld were in power, they did not treat them as humans either. Since they were dogs everywhere, to them, wasn't it the same to be a dog, no matter who they were? Perhaps some dogs that had been mistreated before were resentful and could not wait to bite their current owners to death to vent their anger. Yu Qianqiu originally wanted to take advantage of the fact that he did not know Yu Qianqiu at this time to publicly commend Yu Qianqiu's feat of not being afraid of power because he was never stingy with praising himself. But looking at the situation, he took advantage of the crowd's indignation and quietly squeezed out of the crowd. This kind of speechlessness that was powerless to reverse the situation was not something people at his level could play with. If he had the time, he might as well do something more practical. Now that he had confirmed that the news had been spread, time was precious, and he should be busy with other things. As for what to do and how to save himself, he was now powerless to make decisions on behalf of the immortal realm and the netherworld. Under the dim sky where the sun and moon could not be seen, after the endless vicissitudes of the netherworld, the ancient and broken stone statue with the body of a snake still stood in the rustling wind. The plump breasts proved to the passers-by that it was a woman. She came from the depths of time, facing the Styx and telling the past that had been lost in the long river of history. Although it always attracted people's infinite reverie or ears to listen, no one could understand it, leaving behind some helplessness and a few eternal desolation. The arms of the statue with the body of a snake opened slightly as if to hug, and it seemed to be praying to the heavens for something. So dense snow-like pieces of paper began to fall from the sky.
Ow!
A long howl suddenly sounded, immediately attracting countless people in this twilight city to flash out. Immediately, they saw the sky full of paper fluttering down. Many people grabbed it in their hands to see what was on it. After seeing the content on it, they were all shocked, and Twilight City immediately became chaotic. Many people gathered together to discuss whether the matter was true or false, and many people's first reaction was to report the contents of the leaflets. However, in just a moment, although these flying leaflets were already dead, they still could not resist the corrosion of the netherworld's death aura. Not long after, they all turned into ashes. However, for the people who did this was enough. They just needed to spread the news. In the large area around the Divine Ruin Realm base, not to mention ferocious beasts, not even a small animal could be seen. They had either been killed by the army of heroes who had been training here for a long time, or they had been hunted by the ferocious temple rainbow spiders. In short, the area with the base as the center had become a death zone for the ferocious beasts in the Divine Ruin Realm. This place, which was covered by clouds and filled with white mist, was the training ground for the disciples of the various sects in the immortal world. Now, it had become the forbidden land of the Utopia army, and no one was allowed to set foot in it. However, the sudden appearance of foreign races could not be hidden from the people outside the fog, who had successfully cultivated and evolved into immortal beasts. In addition, Zhang Peng often led people outside the fog for combat training, so it was inevitable that there would be frequent conflicts. In the end, no one was a match for the Utopia army after several battles. Just as Zhang Peng's desire to fight was soaring and he wanted to sweep through the Divine Ruin Realm, the Great Flame Mountain Ape King Yuan Hong stopped him after hearing the news. He told Zhang Peng not to make a big deal out of this, or else he would offend the rainbow-feathered Lion King in the Divine Ruin Realm. When Zhang Peng heard that the rainbow-feathered Lion King's cultivation had reached at least the late-stage Immortal Emperor stage, and that it had many powerful immortal beasts under its command, he embarrassedly suppressed the idea of expanding his territory. At this moment, nearly 10,000 battle-hardened heroes who had been trained by Zhang Peng had gathered. All of them retreated to the vicinity of the base, fully armed, and entered the first level of combat readiness. In the underground base, Yu Qianqiu had gathered the feudal lords of the various countries. He was displaying his ability in ideological work, explaining to everyone the dangers of the demon realm's invasion of the three realms. He also told them that he had already ordered all the human cultivators to gather at the treasure bowl, preparing to help the millions of human cultivators become immortals. He was prepared to fight to the death against the demon path, swearing to not let the pure land in the human world, which had given birth to him, be trampled by the claws of the demon path. Yu Qianqiu held up the banner of Yin Baikong, who would rather die than submit to the foreign races, and shouted passionately. His ideological work could be said to be very successful, and it was very encouraging, making everyone deeply understand that they were not completely powerless to fight back. Furthermore, Yu Qianqiu also vowed that if the situation was unfavorable, he would go to the Great Snow Mountain in the Netherworld to ask the Snow Emperor and Snow Empress for help and borrow 800,000 ice soul crystals from the Great Snow Mountain to help. He also continued to use everyone's backbone by Changchun to stabilize the situation. He said that if it still did not work, he would ask his master, Bai Changchun, who was in meditation, to come forward and turn the situation around. He vowed to fight for a foothold for everyone in the immortal realm. If we still can't win like this, we're not afraid. At worst, we'll just hide back in the divine ruin realm. But I, Yu Qianqiu, am not a coward who is afraid to fight. I will definitely not be a coward if I don't fight with my life on the line. This was the last sentence that Yu Qianqiu said when he encouraged everyone. The whole thing could be summed up as a pre-war mobilization meeting. In reality, Yu Qianqiu was like a camel. If he had not been forced into a dead end by Yan Juexing, he would still want to take the shortcut to take advantage of the situation. Now that it was a matter of life and death, he immediately displayed his ruthlessness. He did everything, said everything, and was prepared to use all his resources and strength to fight. Fortunately, he had accumulated a lot of wealth over the years, but he did not know if it would be of much use. However, he had already made up his mind. Even if he lost, he would make the enemy feel pain. His words caused the expressions of the lords of the various countries to become incomparably grave. Everyone was proud and arrogant, and no one wanted to be a dog. Although Yu Qianqiu had treated them with kindness and authority, he had still treated them well. Moreover, Yu Qianqiu had also done his best to help them improve their cultivation. Seeing that their future was bright, no one wanted to fall into endless darkness and become inferior to pigs and dogs. Fight! Let's fight! Muffled voices rang out in the base. Although there were no heroic words, they knew that Bai Changchun, who had fought against the Celestial Emperor and the Emperor of the Underworld without being defeated, was backing them up. Because Bai Changchun had never disappointed them. What's more, there were huge forces like the Immortal and Netherworld resisting the Demon World's army together. No one felt that there was anything to be afraid of. Chapter 1138. To put it bluntly, these old foxes subconsciously took it for granted that even if the sky collapsed, there would be someone taller to hold it up. What was there to be afraid of? At most, they could just hide back in the divine ruin realm. This was the effect that Yu Qianqiu wanted. He had never thought that he could really make these guys risk their lives without any distracting thoughts. If he put himself in their shoes, he would not do that. Now, he was trying his best to motivate them to go to the battlefield with confidence. He wanted to maintain their morale before the battle and do his best to help them prepare for the battle. As for after the battle, it was not up to them. The reason for doing this was very simple. The messy rogue cultivators in the human cultivation world had long been gathered by Hong Qi and Gu Qingyun. It was not difficult to restrain them. However, he or his Utopia army could not control nearly 1 million cultivators from various forces. The number was too large. However, most of those people were the subordinates or disciples of the feudal lords of various countries. Therefore, he needed to rely on the prestige of the feudal lords to command and manage them. Otherwise, before the battle started, he would be in chaos. De Mingluan, Wei Chuanqiu, and Yun Peng looked at each other. They did not expect Yu Qianqiu to be from the human world and be able to gather such a huge force at any time. What surprised them the most was that Bai Changchun was Yu Qianqiu's master. Heir Xuejuan and Ji Wu were also shocked. Although they knew that Bai Changchun was Yu Qianqiu's master, they did not expect Yu Qianqiu to be able to mobilize such a huge force at any time. He wanted to help millions of cultivators in the human world become immortals. What kind of feeling was this? Nongzhu and Liu Yanqing were the two who were the most emotional. Looking at Yu Qianzhou's impassioned speech to the crowd, they could not help but think of the guy who had fled for his life in the cultivation world back then. Now, he had indeed become famous. As for Yan Zhuixing, he was even more impressive. He actually became the next successor of the Devil King and the current Vice Palace Lord of the Devil Palace. The two fellows who had fought to the death in the cultivation world all those years ago were about to have a head-on confrontation once more. However, the strength they could mobilize and the situation of the battle were no longer their personal matters, but the fate of the three realms. They didn't know who would emerge victorious in the end. They couldn't help but sigh with emotion. On the other hand, Zi, Farong, and the others who had been watching from the side, when they saw Yu Qianzhou's imposing manner of leading a group of heroes into battle, their eyes more or less sparkled with little stars. Zi suddenly realized that this man didn't look that annoying and seemed to be quite charming. Her pretty face secretly blushed, and she looked left and right. Fortunately, no one was paying attention to her right now. At this moment, a cracking sound could be heard from outside. Everyone turned to look and saw a very strange-looking person calmly walking in from the outside. They couldn't see who it was, but the person bowed to Yu Qianzhou and said, "Master, I've come to find you. Everything is ready." Only then did everyone realize that it was Zhang Peng, the person in charge of this place. They couldn't help but look at the armor on his body with interest. Because Zhang Peng had never let them see such a strange attire when he organized everyone's training, they had never seen such a strange attire. First of all, the entire armor was very close-fitting. It was clearly tailor-made. It was covered with spikes of different sizes and lengths, and there was a matching long sword stuck on the back. Only two eyes could be seen, and there were some small air holes between the mouth, nose, and ears. It was an extremely strange appearance. The entire body of the armor glowed with a dark light. It was obvious that it wasn't an ordinary item, but a treasured armor that had been meticulously refined. At this moment, Zhang Peng gave everyone the feeling that he was a demon that had walked out from the depths of darkness. They wanted to use their divine sense to investigate him, but they found that it was impossible to penetrate. Only by using their divine sense to penetrate through the eye sockets and air holes could they see his true appearance. Everyone suddenly saw a person dressed like this appear. Before they knew that this person was Zhang Peng, they couldn't help but feel a little scared. Yu Qianzhou nodded slightly to Zhang Peng. Zhang Peng turned around and walked out, while Yu Qianzhou looked around at everyone and said, "Everyone, follow me out and take a look." Everyone looked at each other. They didn't know what Yu Qianzhou wanted them to see, but they all followed behind Yu Qianzhou and walked out. When they reached the exit of the underground base, a sharp zhi sound suddenly came from above. A multicolored figure jumped down from above, and 8 light golden claws fiercely pounced toward Zhang Peng, who was wearing armor in front of him. There was a ding-dang sound that belonged to metal. "Be careful." Someone in the crowd could not help but give a warning. The others also suddenly became alert, thinking that they had been attacked by a fierce beast from the ruins of God. Yu Qianzhou turned around and said to everyone with a faint smile, "Don't worry, it's one of us." Everyone was stunned. They saw that it was a multicolored spider that was as big as a table. Its 8 sharp claws and ferocious fangs were all like gold. If it spread its limbs, its body length would be at least 4 to 5 meters, and it had already hugged Zhang Peng under its abdomen. Zhang Peng turned around and glared at it. The multicolored spider immediately acted like a child who had done something wrong and landed on the ground obediently. Zhang Peng flashed onto its back, and it immediately used all 8 of its legs to quickly climb out with Zhang Peng on its back. Only then did everyone believe that it was indeed one of their own, but it was a spider. When everyone walked into the valley outside the base, they immediately saw the big spider carrying Zhang Peng as if it was flying up the valley. Yu Qianzhou flew up in a flash, and everyone else followed suit. There was a large group of people standing outside the valley. They were all wearing strange armor like Zhang Peng's, and they were faintly discernible in the mist. They stood silently in the mist, and their auras were like demons that had walked out of a nightmare. It was a very shocking sight to behold. There were even many people with a multicolored spider lying beside them. Its 8 sharp claws moved restlessly, but it didn't dare to move. Its restless and unpredictable claws seemed to want to break out of the misty nightmare and pierce into the chests of the people who were sleeping. Zhang Peng had already received instructions from his master in advance. He had purposely lined up in the form of a military parade to show off his family's wealth, in order to strengthen everyone's determination to not be afraid of a battle. Zhang Peng, who was standing on top of the big spider, suddenly waved his hand and pointed to the left. Everyone couldn't help but look over. Next to a giant snake the size of a small mountain, a giant frog the size of a house, and a giant eagle resting on the ground, there was a ghost-like person in black armor standing next to each of them. Zhang Peng then waved his hand and pointed to the right. The people who were already somewhat dumbfounded looked over again. There was a giant scorpion, a giant centipede, and a strange wolf the size of a horse with scales all over its body bearing its fangs. There were all kinds of fierce beasts everywhere, and every one of them was accompanied by a ghost-like person in black armor. These huge fierce beasts took up a lot of space, and no one knew how many people and strange fierce beasts were in the depths of the mist. No one knew how much killing power these people and strange fierce beasts could unleash. Everyone couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. They didn't expect Yu Qianqiu to have such a team hidden in his hands. What they didn't know was that other than the colorful temple spiders, the other fierce beasts were all created by Zhang Peng. Ever since he saw the power of 1,000 or so colorful temple spiders, Zhang Peng had led his subordinates to search for all kinds of fierce beasts that could unleash special powers and domesticate them, so that the heroic army could unleash even greater power. Hard work paid off, and they finally had a lot of gains over the years. Now that they were being displayed in front of everyone, Zhang Peng couldn't help but feel a little proud of himself. The sturdy and indestructible armor, the strong battle power of unity, and the support of all kinds of fierce and poisonous fierce beasts, this team could finally show off its abilities. Yu Qianqiu swept his gaze across the people below and looked at Zhang Peng with approval. He nodded slightly and instructed, "Have everyone prepare to fight at any time." Zhang Peng respectfully accepted the order. After that, Yu Qianqiu led everyone back to the base, stating that he wanted to get everyone a set of extraterrestrial adamantine battle armor with extremely strong defense, which immediately made everyone excited. Thus, under Yu Qianqiu's guidance, everyone began to measure each other's measurements and recorded their measurements in a jade archive before handing it over to him. Even Wei Chunqiu and the others couldn't help but join in. Only Immortal Crocodile, Ji Wu, and Lu Yanqing didn't join in the fun. Immortal Crocodile wanted a set as well, but he was now a cripple, and his cultivation was sealed by Jin Tai's secret technique. He hadn't found anyone who could remove the seal yet, so it was useless even if he wanted it. Ji Wu, on the other hand, was a little embarrassed to join in. Lu Yanqing, on the other hand, wasn't someone who hated fighting and killing, so she didn't want this evil-looking battle armor at all. As for the envious Ce and the others, they were chased to the side by Yu Qianqiu, telling them to stay where they wanted to be. The girls had a temper, but they knew that this wasn't the time to be disobedient, so they could only go to the side and curse someone. After he was done, Yu Qianqiu pulled Nongzhu along and found the few subordinates who had protected Sherwin-Guang in the past. He asked for a human skin mask that was suitable for Nongzhu, stuffed a silver ball into Nongzhu's hand, and asked her to go to the mystic immortal city to gather information. Because he still had use for the others, he had to bring them back to the human realm to stabilize the hearts of their own subordinates. Nongzhu was a commander without an army, and she was more trustworthy, so he could only trouble her. After sending Nongzhu to the mystic immortal city, Yu Qianqiu quickly returned to the divine ruin realm and rushed to the great flaming mountain to find Elder Nanming and Yuan Hong, telling them about the impending invasion of the Devil Realm. Taking advantage of the fact that the two of them were still in a state of shock and had yet to wake up, he took the jade archive with the measurements recorded on it and made hundreds of sets of extraterrestrial metal essence battle armor. He asked the two of them to put aside their private work of researching and refining artifacts and to focus on the bigger picture and quickly refine these hundreds of sets of battle armor. Yuan Hong saw that his private stash of extraterrestrial metal essence was almost used up, and his heart ached terribly. However, seeing that his master, Elder Nan Ming, had already agreed with a solemn expression, he lost his temper and gritted his teeth to help his master refine the armor. It's so tiring to do ideological work everywhere. It's all that bastard Yan Zhuixing's fault. Yu Qianqiu cursed in his heart, then returned to the base, without stopping. He brought the hundreds of feudal lords back to the human realm and told them to disperse and return home. Then, he quickly gathered all his subordinates and gathered them at the cornucopia. He had no other choice. Other than needing the feudal lords to lead his subordinates in battle, it was also because the task of gathering millions of people was placed on Hong Qi and Gu Qingyun. It would indeed be difficult to complete it in a short period of time, and he couldn't just watch from the sidelines. Chapter 1139. Within the illusory immortal city, a destitute independent cultivator's stall had a few tens of various metal carvings on it. There were all sorts of lifelike birds, beasts, people, and things, and their exquisiteness could indeed be considered as handicrafts. This seemingly destitute independent cultivator was none other than Nongzhu. These *T handicrafts were made by Yu Qianqiu at the last minute in order to fool him, and there were a few hundred of them. In Yu Qianqiu's words, "I'm not really asking you to set up a stall to sell things, and you just have to make something to deal with it. Your main task is to inquire about all sorts of information. If I really get some good things for you to sell, you won't have the time to inquire about information when your business is booming. The more you can't sell something, the better it is." Of course, Yu Qianqiu didn't ask Nongzhu to randomly pick up a few stones to make up the numbers, as he was afraid that Nongzhu would be beaten up by those who didn't like him. Instead, he made some sculptures that were at least passable. At the beginning, because of the influence of the news that the devil dimension was about to descend upon the three dimensions, the square did seem to be much more deserted. However, it was also because of the influence of that news that the flow of people suddenly increased in just a few days. Everyone came to purchase things that they could use or might use as reserves in preparation for the upcoming calamity. The entire illusory immortal city was unprecedentedly bustling, and it could even be described as overcrowded. Not to mention the various stalls on the square, even the mountains of the various sects were filled with endless streams of people. All of them were in a hurry, and the atmosphere was becoming more and more tense. There were people stopping to look at Nongzhu's stall from time to time. Most of them thought that there was something profound about these sculptures, so they asked with interest. Nongzhu was truly speechless, and he could only imitate Yu Qianqiu's words. "This is a work of art that I meticulously carved, and there's nothing profound about it." In the end, he received countless supercilious looks, and many people scolded him for thinking too much about money. He'd never been scolded by so many people in his entire life. At first, Nongzhu really couldn't take it, but as time passed, he got used to it. His attention was focused on the conversations of the people around him, and all sorts of information began to pour in. Speaking of which, the various sects had to thank Yu Qianqiu for using the teleportation function of the Golden Pearl to deliver the news in time. When the various sects received the news from their sects, they were all shocked. Almost all the forces that were close to the demonic world's passageway gathered there without any hesitation. They did their best to set up all sorts of restrictions at the sealed entrance to the demonic world to prevent the passageway from being opened. The most outrageous one was the one in the immortal world. Around the sealed passageway to the devil world, nearly 100 sects had arrived in time to set up countless formations of various sizes. As long as it was a formation that each sect knew, they would set it up regardless of the consequences. Even if it had been repeated countless times, as long as there was space nearby, they would set it up as much as they wanted. They kept setting up all kinds of restrictions. Nearly 100 sects set up formations in the sky and on the ground. It was a spectacular scene. As a result, within a radius of hundreds of miles, the heaven and earth were covered with gloomy clouds and fog. It was so dark that one couldn't even see his own fingers, let alone find the location of the entrance to the devil world. As expected, Jin Tai and Bai Qi came here. Because they were in the immortal world, the sealed entrance to the devil world was naturally the most convenient choice. Relying on their strong cultivation, the two of them directly killed their way here. As a result, when they arrived, they were also shocked by the situation in front of them. However, time waited for no man. Wang Qing must have heard the news and came here, so the two of them directly broke the formations. Rumble, rumble, rumble. None of the formations could stop them, and they were forcibly broken one after another. But no matter how powerful the two of them were, they couldn't resist the fact that there were too many formations. It took them nearly a day to break through more than 10,000 formations and forcibly advance 100 miles. The strength of the two of them could be imagined, but they still couldn't see the shadow of the sealed entrance to the devil world. The two of them were immediately dumbfounded. They finally understood what it meant to anger the public, and they finally understood the power of the masses. Jin Tai was so angry that he stomped his feet and cursed Yu Qianqiu. If it wasn't for Yu Qianqiu leaking the news, how could they encounter such an unprecedented good thing? At this time, Wang Qing also hurried over. A six-dragon snow blue sword forced the two of them to flee again. After they left, the hundreds of sects that scattered immediately saw that it was effective, so they immediately gathered again and began to set up the formations day and night. At the same time, they quickly sent a message to the other sections. As a result, the other sects naturally followed suit. Without saying anything, they directly piled up the passages to the 72 worlds with countless formations to prevent Jin Tai and Bai Qi from breaking into the human world to open the passage to the devil world. The netherworld, which was shocked by what happened in the immortal world, quickly followed suit and piled up the passages to the devil world and the 72 worlds with countless formations. After this matter, the immortal world and the netherworld finally believed in Yu Qianqiu's warning. Wang Qing even directly announced to the whole world that Yu Qianqiu had taken great credit. From today onwards, the grievances between the Heartless Palace and Yu Qianqiu were written off, and the various forces that were scared to the point of cold sweat expressed their praises to Yu Qianqiu without hesitation. However, Yu Qianqiu himself did not expect that the various sects could come up with such a method. He had always thought that there were too many entrances to the devil world. With just the power of Wang Qing and his son, they could not take care of the east and west. So, he was still actively preparing for war. Nongzhu, who received this news, could not help but sigh. No matter what happened in the future, at least for now, it seemed that the boy really changed the fate of the three realms. Then, in view of Jin Tai and Bai Qi's unscrupulous means, under the call of the King of the Black Mountain in the Netherworld and the Heartless Palace in the Immortal World, all the forces were mobilized. They patrolled their respective territories day and night, searching for Jin Tai and Bai Qi's whereabouts. And for their own interests, everyone united unprecedentedly. At the first moment, they jointly formed the Immortal Underworld Demon Killing Alliance. The groups formed by the two realms deployed their forces as quickly as possible and divided their forces to guard the passages to the various realms. Once they found that the formations were destroyed, they immediately filled them up. Not long after, another piece of news came. Under the inescapable net formed by all the forces, they really found Jin Tai and Bai Qi's sneaky tracks in the immortal world. However, they had no way of catching the two. After the two killed many people, they easily escaped. Then, the two's tracks appeared again and again in various places, but there was nothing they could do. In the end, they were repeatedly destroyed and repaired at the same time. For a time, Jin Tai and Bai Qi were exhausted, and Wang Qing and Wu Feng, who chased the two everywhere to put out the fire, were also unbearably tired. However, in terms of cultivation and speed, they were not as good as the two's ability to escape. They really could not do anything to the two who specialized in destruction. The two sides were in a stalemate. So, someone suggested that the passage between the immortal world and the netherworld should also be stacked with a large formation to reduce the area where the two could escape. But Wang Qing and his son knew that it was useless. With the two's cultivation, no matter if they were trapped in the immortal world or the netherworld, If they wanted to escape, no one could do anything to them. In the end, because they did not do this, Jean Tai and Bai Chi finally found the opportunity. Chapter 1140. At the Cornucopia Commerce's headquarters, the god of wealth peak that still stood tall despite the damage was packed with people. The various feudal lords had gathered all their subordinates. The Green Gang and Hong Gang had gathered all the rogue cultivators from all over the world. Even China's cultivation world, which had the largest number of cultivators, had no choice but to comply. In a short time, over 1 million cultivators from all over the world had gathered here, an unprecedented grand occasion. Amidst the bustling crowd, everyone was looking around, curious and nervous at the same time. Most of them had no idea why they were here. Several hundred feudal lords and sect chiefs were having a meeting on the god of wealth peak. Considering that some feudal lords only had a few hundred or dozens of people under them, while others had tens of thousands of people under them, and some sects of different sizes were also in the same situation, the merger and reorganization began. Over 1 million cultivators were divided into 10 corps, with each corps having a little over 100,000 people. The several hundred feudal lords were divided into 9 groups, with a few people in each group as the core of each corps. The remaining corps consisted of over 100,000 rogue cultivators, all of which were added to the Hong Gang and Green Gang, under the command of Hong Qi and Gu Qingyun. The Huaxia cultivation world was broken up by sections. Sects of different sizes were distributed according to the number of people, and they were all under the core subordinates of the lords of the various countries. After the meeting was over, the commanders of the 10 newly formed corps swiftly gave the order to count the cultivation level of their subordinates. One had to admit that Yu Qianqiu used these people correctly. First of all, they knew their subordinates inside out. Adding to their inherent prestige, their work efficiency was extremely high. It took less than half a day to get a detailed result after counting over 1 million people. If Yu Qianqiu were to do it himself, it would be hard for him to even sort out the people. After receiving the detailed data, Yu Qianqiu immediately distributed 1 billion divine-grade spirit stones to each of the 10 corps, throwing out 10 billion divine-grade spirit stones in one go. A foundation establishment cultivator would need, at most 4 billion high-grade spirit stones to advance to the immortal realm. Even if one were to start from the qi refining stage, it wouldn't exceed 5 billion high-grade spirit stones. If converted to divine-grade spirit stones, it would only be 15 pieces. Each of you will receive 15 pieces of divine-grade spirit stones. An army of 100,000 people will at most cost a little over 1 million divine-grade spirit stones. The rest of the spirit stones will be used as management expenses. When he and Zhongpeng experimented on their subordinates in Utopia, he already had first-hand data on the consumption of spirit stones. On top of that, Hong Qi and Gu Qingyun had invited cultivators from all over the world to refine countless medicinal pellets for them, so he was well prepared. After distributing the spirit stones, Huang Xiaolong quickly distributed a large number of Foundation Establishment pellets, 7 Treasures pellets, Great Restriction Breaking pellets, Marrow Cleansing pellets, and Immortal Ascension pellets according to the statistics. When such a large batch of medicinal pellets was distributed, even the various feudal lords who had come to the immortal world to broaden their horizons were shocked. How many so-called spiritual herbs and immortal herbs were needed to refine them all? However, it was just a slight shock, and it didn't matter in the blink of an eye. In any case, everyone was used to seeing Yu Qianqiu's remarkable abilities, and it wasn't the first time they had seen something so inconceivable. The method to consume the medicinal pellets was not a problem for the feudal lords who were experienced. They quickly took the items they received and went to make arrangements. Half a day later, the crowd at the foot of the God of Fortune Peak sat down cross-legged. In an instant, the fragrance of various medicinal pellets filled the air, but the millions of people present were so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. In the following days, the sky above the God of Fortune Peak was covered with dark clouds. It was as if thousands of thunderbolts were connected to the God of Fortune Peak. There was an endless stream of experts who had forcibly raised their cultivation to the immortal realm, flying up to the god of Fortune Peak to forge their immortal bodies. There was also an endless stream of people who were overjoyed and successful, flying down to the god of Fortune Peak, willing to wait for arrangements. A month later, the entire cornucopia was empty. The millions of people had all disappeared, and everything that could be taken away from the World Commerce Chamber had been taken away. The wild beasts and birds in the mountains gradually became bolder and began to appear in this area. The empty houses became their safe nests to shelter from the wind and rain. The spiders also began to weave their webs on the doors and windows without worry. No one knew when the owner of this place would return. It was not only the cornucopia. In places that were difficult for mortals to reach, such as primeval forests, mountains, and seas, or places that were shrouded in clouds and mist, there were places that were left empty in the eyes of mortals. There were no more immortals who could fly in the sky or burrow into the ground, and there were no more world-shocking magical powers. There were only richly ornamented buildings, jade palaces, and wonderful cave dwellings listening to the bleak wind. Chapter 1141. Hearing this, Yu Qianqiu couldn't help but think of Qianghua Fairy, the head of the Moon Clan who was under her command. If he really made Nongzhu fall in love with her, there would be a good show to watch. He really wanted to do that, but now is not the time for them to talk about love. He coughed and said, "In your dreams, do you want Nongzhu to have a baby with you?" Hearing this, everyone burst into laughter. Yu Nantian laughed more happily than anyone else, as if he had vented his anger. Shu Xian bit her lips and raised her eyebrows. If you really want to do that and Nongzhu agrees, Shu Xian will not object. Such courage made everyone burst into laughter again. All right. Yu Qianqiu raised his hand to stop them from laughing. It was enough to relax for a while. They couldn't keep fooling around at this critical moment. His face darkened, and he said, "That's it. We will build an army composed of women. Yu Nantian will be the commander, and Shu Xian will assist." Before he finished his words, the two of them lost their voices and said, "Torture envoy." Yu Nantian didn't expect Yu Qianqiu to really do this. It was so unreasonable. And Shu Xian didn't want Yu Nantian to be above her. Why should a man be the commander of a women's army? Yu Qianqiu coldly glanced at them, causing them to swallow back their words. Then, he coldly glanced at the crowd, causing them to be unable to laugh. Then he continued slowly, "This is not a joke. An army with men and women training together is a real joke. When we go back, the 10 armies will discuss with each other and adjust the number of soldiers reasonably. Anyway, we will remove all the women and form the 11th army. I know that many of them are husband and wife or are relatives, but I'm doing this for the good of everyone. It's better to let the men do the fighting and the women do the logistics in the rear. I think they'll be happy for the safety of their relatives." He had this idea before and wanted to find an opportunity that everyone could accept. Otherwise, it would be more difficult to command a temporary army with a family living in a team. Secondly, they would have a group of hostages in their hands, which would more or less make the motley crew think twice. Yu Nantian and Shu Xian's faces became more and more gloomy. It turned out that they were in charge of a logistics team. The others had no objections to this. As long as it did not weaken their authority, it was fine. They all agreed to carry it out as soon as they returned. Everyone.
There are some things that I have to say first.
Yu Qianqiu looked at the crowd and said, "Now that everyone's cultivation base is about the same, it doesn't matter who is in charge. If the core commander of any legion is not capable enough, I don't mind recruiting more capable people from below. As for those who have made great contributions, they will be rewarded with unimaginable benefits in the future. Who knows, they might even have the opportunity to establish their own sect in the immortal world." As soon as these words were spoken, the atmosphere instantly became heavy. Putting aside the matter of whether he could establish a sect in the immortal dimension in the future, if the disciples he ordered around in the past were to order him around instead, then it would truly be a fatal matter. Only then did everyone realize that they had boarded Yu Qianqiu's pirate ship. It was too late for regrets. After a moment of silence, Hu Changsho suddenly walked out and cupped his hands, saying, "Torture envoy. You also know that we have no experience in leading an army to war. I see that Zhang Peng is quite proficient in this field. Can we ask him for some advice?" Everyone's eyes also looked at Zhang Peng, who was standing still in front of the formation below. Yu Qianzhou's gaze swept across everyone's faces. Seeing that everyone's faces were full of anticipation, he was instantly delighted. This was the effect he had spent a lot of effort to achieve. If he forced them to train, it would definitely cause these guys to resent him. If they did not actively cooperate, then it would be big trouble. He tilted his head and suddenly shouted, "Zhang Peng." Zhang Peng responded with a yes and flew up in a flash. Yu Qianzhou pointed at everyone and said, "Before the war, the training of the 11 legions will be handed over to you." Zhang Peng immediately accepted the order. After everyone returned to the Divine Ruin Realm, the core members of the various legions immediately surrounded Zhang Peng to ask for advice. Zhang Peng first explained to everyone the importance of the legion's hierarchy, then asked them to sort out this matter first. Everyone was smart and felt that it was reasonable. They immediately dispersed and hurriedly went to deal with this matter. By the time they came one after another to ask for advice, Zhang Peng had already divided the battle-hardened heroic army into 20 legions and let each legion lead 2 teams of people. One team would be used to train the people under them, and the other team would be sent to strictly enforce military discipline. How could a newly formed mob be so easy to train? As a result, on the same day, many of the troublemakers in the 10 legions were killed on the spot by the law enforcement team. In total, there were more than 10,000 people, and it almost caused an uproar. After all, everyone was now at the immortal realm, so there was no need to be afraid of them. However, in order to twist the evil aura of this group of repulsive people and get them on the right track as soon as possible, Yu Qianzhou made up his mind and sent Ming Luin, Wei Chuanqiu, and Yun Peng, these 3 immortal emperor-level experts, to patrol around. Yu Qianzhou's original words to the 3 of them were, "Don't be lenient, kill those who need to be killed." It was better for some of them to die now than all of them in the future. As a result, the 3 of them killed another 10,000 people the next day. Seeing that there were immortal emperor-level experts holding down the fort, killing them as easily as cutting vegetables, the mob immediately understood how insignificant they were. They were so scared that they kept quiet out of fear and became well-behaved. Their training was finally on the right track. In fact, most of these troublemakers were the subordinates of the various countries' lords or people who were used to having power in their sections. Ordinary people didn't dare to jump around. As the training progressed, those people who usually didn't have the chance to raise their heads in their sects suddenly realized that under this strict hierarchy, no matter what your background was, as long as your results were better than others and you were more capable than others, the instructors would immediately give you a chance to be promoted. As for those who were mediocre, no matter how powerful your background was, they would immediately be beaten down. The rise of a group of powerless and insignificant people immediately set off a prairie fire in the 10 great legions. Those who had never had the chance to stand out immediately desperately seized this opportunity to stand out. As a result, the descendants of those with power and influence in the past were immediately unhappy. Those who were usually trampled under their feet were now bossing them around. How could they accept this? Hence, they all relied on their connections to find the lords of the legion's core, their fathers, or their masters to complain. The most typical example was Hu Changshou's son, Hu Yuntian. Hu Changshou couldn't help but be selfish in the initial stages of the establishment of a legion. 100,000 people were to be divided into 10 divisions, so he made his son a division commander. Needless to say, Hu Yuntian was quite happy to see so many subordinates under him. The military rules stated that as a division commander, his words were like a mountain to the tens of thousands of people under him. They had to obey his orders, and those who disobeyed would be directly punished by military law. This was much more power than when he borrowed his father's influence in the Cloud Palace. These people were all under his command. Hence, both openly and secretly, he promoted the wisdom of the torturer, Yu Qianzhou, and strongly supported the military management of the various forces. He also thought that since his father was the Legion commander, it was only a matter of time before he was promoted from division commander to one of the 3 corps commanders. At that time, his authority would increase by several times. In order to facilitate his management in the future, he strongly opposed the original forces in the Legion forming factions and disobeying the orders of their superiors. Chapter 1142. Since there were no more violations, De Mingluan and the other 2 didn't need to patrol around anymore. On this day, when the 3 of them returned to the base, they passed by Furong and the other women and heard them grumbling, blaming Yu Qianqiu for not letting them participate in such a lively event. Especially Zi. She pouted and said to the women, "You are all beauties in his harem. It's fine if he keeps you in his harem, but why doesn't he let me do this and that? It's so boring." Wei Chunqiu, who was passing by, couldn't help but chuckle and say, "Little girl, that brat must have his reasons for doing this. Just listen to him. Otherwise, hee. I've finally learned something. That brat's methods are really powerful." The women looked at him in confusion. Zi was also familiar with him, so she immediately pestered him and asked with wide eyes, "What did the big liar do this time?" Hee. You're right. He is indeed a big liar. Wei Chunqiu immediately analyzed the things that Yu Qianqiu had done recently to the women. First, they used the invasion of the demon realm to scare the lords of the various countries. Then, they encouraged the lords to use their respective rallying powers to gather all the cultivators in one place. They raised everyone's cultivation to the immortal realm before bringing them back. Then, he used his power to lure the feudal lords and the original forces to help him straighten out the millions of people. Then, he tricked the feudal lords to watch a show and made them take the initiative to ask for more training. Only then did Yu Qianqiu set up a set of design system for the millions of people. In the end, it didn't take long for the millions of people to completely change their views on sections. Everyone didn't take their original sects and feudal lords seriously, and only wanted to stand out and climb up under his system. Thus, in a short period of time, Yu Qianqiu completely won over the millions of people under his command. So many forces collapsed in the blink of an eye and merged into Yu Qianqiu's force. Do you guys think that brat is a big liar? Do you guys think that brat is powerful? Wei Chunqiu walked towards the depths of the base while shaking his head and sighing. Powerful. How amazing. I've lived for so long, but this is the first time I've seen someone use such a strange method to control so many people. It's thousands of times more powerful than conquering people by force. If Jin Tai and Bai Qi had used this system in the immortal realm and the netherworld, they wouldn't have fallen to such a state. TSA. What they didn't know was that this was just their own analysis. To Yu Qianqiu, this was just going with the flow. Of course, there was no lack of scheming and scheming. However, from Yu Qianqiu's point of view, this system was just a system that had been perfected in his previous life. He had only roughly imitated it from his previous life. He had not designed it at all, and it was not as powerful and exaggerated as Wei Chunqiu had described. Of course, it seemed to have a good effect in the short term, but as time passed, it would not be able to withstand the corrosion of human greed. Most importantly, everyone's cultivation level was about the same now, so he had only borrowed it for a while. He definitely did not think that it was as exaggerated as Wei Chunqiu had described. However, for Furong and the others, after hearing Wei Chunqiu's description, they felt as if they had seen a huge net that had been meticulously laid out step by step. It was like a monster that could devour the heavens and swallow 1,000,000 people in one gulp. Just thinking about it was too terrifying. They felt that Yu Qianqiu's schemes were too frightening. Immortal Crocodile and Ji Wu looked at each other, stunned by Wei Chunqiu's analysis. Zi watched Wei Chunqiu leave with her mouth wide open. After a long time, she gulped and said, "Big liar. He deceived so many people at once. It's too scary." Beside her, the Allure Beauty shook her head slightly and said, "In such a chaotic world, a man should be like this. Otherwise, how can he achieve anything? This is not scary. It can only be said that his ability is something that others can't even beg for. Farong and the others also shook their heads to get rid of the terrible haze that Wei Chuanqiu had described in their minds, and then nodded in agreement with the Allure Beauty's words. It just so happened that Yu Qianqiu had straightened out the matters in the Divine Ruin realm, and the matter of arranging weapons for everyone was put on the agenda. He couldn't let so many people still use weapons from the human world to fight against the people of the demon realm. Before leaving, he called Hong Qi over, and the two of them walked over while talking. The mother and daughter were crying and saying that you killed Ma Jugu. What's going on? Yu Qianqiu asked with a frown. Hong Qi did listen to him and kidnapped by Hua Fairy and Yan Zixia, but the mother and daughter acted like he was an irreconcilable enemy when they saw him. They questioned him, saying that Ma Jugu had no grievances with him, so why didn't he let her go? Yan Zixia was even more desperate to fight with him, but her cultivation was sealed, so she couldn't hurt anyone. Then, she took the initiative to ask Ferdinand, who was guarding them, to forcibly take them away. Looking at Ferdinand's appearance, he was also quite emotional, and his expression was somewhat inexplicable, as if he was afraid that he would hurt the mother and daughter, so he volunteered to guard them. Yu Qianqiu had a lot of things to do, so he didn't pay attention to them at first, but before he left, he couldn't help but call Hong Qi over to ask what was going on. Hong Qi smiled bitterly and said, "Master, I didn't want to. Killing people is not something to be happy about. But that old woman stayed with the mother and daughter day and night. When I took action, that old woman risked her life to protect them. I remembered that Master said that anyone who dares to stop me will be killed, so I directly killed her."
Oh.
Right, I also killed a beautiful woman who turned out to be a toad demon.
Don't worry, Master.
Nobody knows that the mother and daughter were kidnapped by us. Those who know have been killed by me, and I have also disposed of their corpses cleanly. The last sentence sounded like he was bragging. Yu Qianqiu was stunned and said, "Lan Bingxue was also killed by you?" He still wanted to find this B***TCH to settle the score with Farong one day, but he didn't expect this disciple to make the first move. It seemed that this kid had been in the gang for a long time, and he was not careless when it came to killing flowers. "Did you kill the wrong person?" Hong Qi asked a little weakly. Yu Qianqiu waved his hand helplessly and said, "Forget it.
So be it.
You go and do your thing." He now finally understood why Ferdinand looked a little weird. He probably knew that Lan Bingxue was killed from the mother and daughter. After all, the two used to be husband and wife. No matter how big the conflict between them was, it would be a lie to say that he didn't feel anything after knowing that the person was dead. Looking at the back of Hong Qi leaving, he shook his head helplessly and smiled bitterly. Just when he walked a few steps with his hands behind his back, he saw a group of women in the hall of the base looking at him strangely, as if they didn't know him. He couldn't help but be stunned and touched his face. He didn't wear a mask. He was a little stunned and said, "What's wrong with you guys?" The women shook their heads together to show that it was nothing. Zi looked at Hong Qi, who had disappeared, and asked weakly, "Yu Qianqiu, what are you and Hong Qi whispering about? Are you thinking of doing something bad again?" "Psycho," Yu Qianqiu snorted. Just when he was about to turn into the passage on the side, he suddenly stopped and stared at Zi for a while with deep meaning. He wondered if he should arrange for Jasper Flower Fairy to meet this woman. It would be good to have a mother to teach her how to be a woman so that she wouldn't always talk nonsense when she saw him. But when he thought of Nongju's attitude, it seemed a little immoral for him to fan the fire in her backyard when she went to do something for him. After hesitating for a while, he temporarily gave up the idea. Zi was stared at by his strange eyes, and then thought of Wei Chuanqiu's words. She suddenly felt creeped out. The other women also looked at each other. At this moment, Zhang Peng rushed in from outside. After bowing to his master and showing respect to the women, he reported to Yu Qianqiu, "Master, I accidentally found Shi Wenguang's son, Shi Shaotian, in the army." He meant to ask if Yu Qianqiu had any instructions. He knew that Yu Qianqiu and Shi Xiaotian used to have a good friendship. He vaguely remembered that Shi Xiaotian had always called his master boss at that time, so he said this. Shi Xiaotian? Yu Qianqiu was startled. Only now did he remember that he hadn't seen this kid for many years and had almost forgotten about him. He couldn't help but click his tongue and said, Hong Qi and the others really plundered all the cultivators in the mortal world clean. Even Shi Xiaotian, who was hiding in the imperial palace, was pulled over by them. By the way, since Shi Xiaotian is here, he should have seen me when he was in the cornucopia and should know that I am here. Why didn't he come to me? Could it be that there are obstructions? That's not it. Zhang Peng smiled and said, I asked him after I saw him. He seems to be a little worried that you won't recognize him now that your status is different. He's afraid that you won't recognize him anymore. He's afraid that something awkward will happen if he suddenly asks to see you, so he wants to see you but doesn't dare to. I've already brought him to you. He's just outside. Do you want to see him? This kid. Yu Qianqiu also chuckled twice, raised his hand and said, This boy was once a brother who went through thick and thin with me. Since he came, no matter how busy he is, I have to see him. Invite him to the conference room. I want to catch up with him. Zhang Peng accepted the order and left. Yu Qianqiu first went to the base's conference room while the women were discussing who this Shi Xiaotian was. Farong, who had seen Shi Xiaotian in the northwest barracks, roughly explained his identity. Not long after, a nervous Shi Xiaotian was let in. He didn't dare to look around, but when he saw a group of beautiful women staring at him, he quickly lowered his head. He didn't notice that Hibiscus was greeting him with an expectant look on her face, so he followed Zhang Peng into the passageway. After Zhang Peng led him to the door of the conference room, he stretched his hand and said, Master is waiting for you inside. I won't disturb you anymore. After saying that, he left. Shi Xiaotian looked left and right, feeling a little uneasy at the door. He nervously rubbed his hands together and finally gritted his teeth and slowly walked in. Chapter 1143. Walking lightly into the spacious conference room, Shi Xiaotian saw Yu Qianqiu's familiar and warm smile at first glance. Shi Xiaotian's tense heart had just relaxed when he saw Yu Qianqiu's face gradually surging with a solemn expression. His heart immediately tightened again. He respectfully saluted and said, Punishment envoy. Don't be so distant. There's no need to be like this between us. Yu Qianqiu sighed and shook his head. Actually, Shi Xiaotian had misunderstood him. He just suddenly realized that Shi Xiaotian had changed from that inexperienced youth to a tough middle-aged man. He felt like he was dreaming. He thought back to how pathetic they were when they escaped from Ong Guangzheng. In the blink of an eye, decades had passed. However, the Yu Qianqiu in Shi Xiaotian's eyes was still the same as before. Other than the baptism of hardships on his face, his entire aura had changed. He was no longer hiding in his own house and didn't dare to go out. His appearance didn't seem to have changed much. Seeing that he was still a little reserved, Yu Qianqiu took the initiative to walk over and naturally put his arm on Shi Xiaotian's shoulder. He chuckled and said, Xiaotian, I didn't expect a pretty boy like you to become so manly. It seems like you've seen many beauties in your family's palace. Although it was a teasing remark, such a familiar action immediately made Shi Xiaotian feel as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He realized that his boss was still the same boss and hadn't changed at all. Thus, the big man instantly became teary-eyed. He turned around and grabbed Yu Qianqiu's arm and choked. Boss, what are you crying for? You're disgusting. Yu Qianqiu pushed him away. He didn't expect Shi Xiaotian to still be that unlucky person who cried at the slightest provocation. He pulled a chair behind him and sat down. He looked at Shi Xiaotian like he was looking at a playboy and said, What's going on? Since you saw me, why didn't you come to find me? Take a seat and tell me slowly. He hooked a chair with his leg. Shi Xiaotian felt a little embarrassed under his gaze. He rubbed his eyes, sat opposite him, and told him the reason. It turned out that his current identity was already the state preceptor Yongzhen of the Hua Xia Empire. After listening to Yu Qianqiu's words, he had never had much contact with the people of the cultivation world. However, when Yu Qianzhou ordered all the cultivators to gather at the cornucopia, he was a dignified state preceptor of the Huaxia Empire and could be considered a person with a little fame in the cultivation world. Naturally, Honggang and Qinggang couldn't miss him when they summoned people. When he received the notice that it was Yu Qianzhou who gathered all the cultivators in the world, he was extremely excited and eagerly ran to the gathering. When he arrived at the cornucopia, he saw millions of cultivators, among which there were even many experts. However, these people all worshipped Yu Qianzhou. He immediately understood that Yu Qianzhou was now the ruler of the world. Although he was some state preceptor, he didn't even have the qualifications to speak to Yu Qianzhou. He saw Yu Qianzhou's several appearances at the cornucopia, and he also hoped that Yu Qianzhou could see him. However, Yu Qianzhou's eyes only swept past him and didn't linger on him at all. This further dispelled the idea of rashly looking for Yu Qianzhou. To be exact, he didn't dare to do so. After that, he saw Yu Qianzhou communicating with the heavenly thunder on the cornucopia to help everyone forge the immortal body. This made him tremble with fear and didn't dare to be presumptuous. It was also here that he accidentally met Zhang Peng, an acquaintance. Otherwise, it would be difficult for the two to recognize each other even though they were so close. The conference room fell silent. Yu Qianzhou didn't say a word. He had gained a lot and lost a lot along the way. As long as he continued to walk the path, such things would be unavoidable. Gains and losses would always accompany him. Shi Xiaotian looked at him silently. Thinking back to when the two of them were still working hard in Ongquangsung, he never thought that Yu Qianzhou's future achievements would reach such heights. He didn't know that there was always someone better than him. After a long silence, Yu Qianzhou slowly said, "Xiaotian, you should go back to the human world." Shi Xiaotian was startled and then said anxiously, "Boss, let me stay by your side and travel the 3 realms with you." After coming to the Divine Ruin Realm and coming into contact with so many people and things, he realized that the outside world was actually so vast and so exciting. It was much more interesting than being the Imperial Preceptor in the human world. Moreover, he had such a powerful boss to protect him. He hadn't even seen the immortal and netherworld yet. How could he go back? Yu Qianzhou gently waved his hand and said with a faint smile, "The outside world isn't as fun as you think. There's a price to pay for fun. You might not think so. Now that you have forged the immortal body, it's better for you to stay in the human world and enjoy your wealth. You and I are brothers. This is all I can help you with. Let's go. Don't say any more. I'll send you back." With a wave of his hand, Shi Xiaotian suddenly felt the scene change. When it stabilized, he found that he had returned to the back garden of the Pillar of State General's residence. However, there was no one living here now. His entire family had moved into the palace, and only a few servants were here to take care of it. Shi Xiaotian looked around and knew that it was useless to say anything else. He forced a smile and said, "I didn't expect boss to still remember this place. Boss. Since you're already here, go to the palace and rest for a while. My father often mentions you and has been longing to see you again. I almost forgot. Your family is already the royal family. It's good to know the way. Lead the way." Yu Qianzhou said with a faint smile. Shi Xiaotian let out a happy sigh and flew into the sky. Yu Qianzhou followed closely behind. The two of them quickly flew over the bustling capital city below and directly entered the Grand Palace. Under a gold-plated Yongzhen plaque, Shi Xiaotian invited Yu Qianzhou to sit in the Imperial Advisor's mansion. The eunuchs and attendants were ordered by Shi Xiaotian to work around the clock to serve Yu Qianzhou. Those eunuchs and attendants secretly looked at Yu Qianzhou in surprise, wondering who this young man was to make Imperial Advisor Yongzhen, who was second only to the emperor, treat him with such respect. Therefore, they didn't dare to neglect him. Yu Qianzhou didn't have the time to slowly enjoy this ostentatious scene. He told Shi Xiaotian to stop wasting time and quickly invite his family to meet him. Shi Xiaotian asked him to wait for a moment and quickly ran away. The group of eunuchs was even more shocked. This person actually dared to order the godlike Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen around like this. For a moment, They were so nervous that they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. They waited for a full 2 hours. Yu Qianqiu looked around the Grand Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen and was still wondering why he was taking so long. Outside the door, a large group of men, women, old and young had already arrived. There were more than 100 people rushing in. Some of them were even infants in the arms of the women waiting to be fed. However, all of them were dressed luxuriously. The people in the front were all wearing yellow dragon robes. One look, and one could tell that they were the descendants of the royal family. Many of them seemed to be puzzled. They didn't know why they were called here in such a hurry. Yu Qianqiu immediately saw Shi Wenguang, who looked vigorous despite his old age. Behind him were his sons and daughters-in-law. He didn't know the men, women, or children behind them, but it was obvious that they were all from the same family. Yu Qianqiu thought to himself, "My goodness, the royal family is indeed different. It's amazing how they spread their branches and leaves." Just as a smile appeared on his face, Shi Wenguang, who was wearing the dragon robe, was already in front of him. He was the first to kneel down and excitedly called out, "Mister?" Regardless of whether they knew what was going on or not, when they saw the emperor kneeling down, they immediately followed suit in fear and called out, "Mister?" Shi Xiaotian hurriedly stepped aside in embarrassment. The group of eunuchs and attendants were shocked by this scene and immediately knelt down as well in horror. Yu Qianqiu, on the other hand, sat there calmly. He crossed his legs and raised his hand, saying, "Rise, all of you, rise." He also felt that he deserved this bow. He had given the greatest wealth in the mortal world to their family and saved their lives. It was not too much to accept their bow. Shi Wenguang immediately led a large group of his family members and stood up. Yu Qianqiu also stood up with a smile and walked in front of him, saying, "General Shi, you are still strong despite your age. Congratulations." He was too lazy to change the way he addressed him. "It's all thanks to Mister's favor. Mister is still as elegant as ever, like a celestial being. Shi Wenguang can only envy you." Shi Wenguang was filled with endless gratitude. He was almost 90 years old, but he was still more spirited than his own descendants. He understood that this was the result of Yu Qianqiu's immortal elixir back then. He was even thinking of finding a suitable opportunity to ask for a few more. Yu Qianqiu smiled and turned his gaze to behind Shi Wenguang. There were 4 familiar faces who were used to a good life and had already changed their figures. There were 2 old men who were close to the end of their lives, and 2 graceful women. He pointed at them one by one and said with a smile, "Shi Yutian, Shi Intian Bao Wan Shi Sidahui."
Huh?
Did I remember correctly? "Greetings, mister." The 4 people who were called out were pleasantly surprised and hurriedly came forward to salute. When the 2 women saw that the man who had some entanglements with them in the past was still as young as before, their eyes couldn't help but shine with admiration. Among them, Shi Yutian was even more excited. He had always been interested in becoming an immortal. Back then, he thought that Yu Qianqiu was a celestial being and had always wanted to follow him to cultivate. Now that he saw Yu Qianqiu's youthful appearance, he couldn't help but feel his heart itch. Where's Madame Li? Yu Qianqiu glanced at the crowd and didn't see the mistress of the house, Li Hongniang. As soon as he said this, the atmosphere suddenly became heavy. Shi Intian explained in a low voice, "Mister, Mother passed away 5 years ago." "I see." Yu Qianqiu nodded slightly and consoled. "Birth, old age, sickness, and death are the laws of nature. Everyone don't be too sad." His words were pleasant to the ears. Why didn't he look at himself standing there with his youthful appearance? Who wouldn't be envious of him? Moreover, Shi Wenguang had lived a long life because of him. Once a person reached the peak of riches and honor, he would naturally desire longevity. Shi Yutian suddenly thought of something and hurriedly called out a group of juniors from the crowd to greet Yu Qianqiu. He even pulled their faces in front of Yu Qianqiu, as if he wanted Yu Qianqiu to take a closer look at them. In the end, the second son's daughter-in-law was also enlightened. She also pulled out her juniors for a walk. Chapter 1144. Not to mention that he didn't have the time. Even if he did, he wouldn't take away such a large group of cultivators in the human world and cultivate a new group for the royal family. He didn't want to embarrass Sir Xiaotian, so he perfunctorily told the group of princes, grandsons, and princesses that the people should be the foundation. He also emphasized that if he found anyone who bullied the people in the future, he would personally deal with them sooner or later. After scaring the group of juniors into submission, Yu Qianqiu used the excuse that he was tired and drove all of them away. Only Sir Xiaotian, who was apologizing, was left in the hall. With his back facing him, Yu Qianqiu picked up a cup of fragrant tea and took 2 sips. Suddenly, he opened his palm, and 2 golden tokens quickly condensed and appeared in his hand. He threw them behind him and said, "Look carefully." Sir Xiaotian took the 2 tokens and looked at them carefully. There were 2 sides. One was engraved with the word order, and the other was engraved with the word country guardian. The surrounding decorations were all kinds of lifelike birds and beasts. The 2 tokens were exactly the same. After looking at them, he asked in confusion, "Boss, is this for me?" Yu Qianqiu put down the teacup in his hand and took back one of the tokens. He shook it and said, "You can use this token as a keepsake in the future. I'll give one to you, and I'll give the other to someone else. If one day someone comes to find you with this token, try to help them in a discreet way. You can only help them 3 times at most. After 3 times, you can take back this token." Sir Xiaotian nodded and said, "I'll remember." Yu Qianqiu put away the token and said indifferently, "There's one more thing I want to tell you. I've always hoped that the human world will be the human world, and that the grievances between mortals don't need to be interfered with by others. This is also one of the reasons why I drove all the cultivators in the human world away. Next, if possible, I'll get rid of all the demons and ghosts in the human world, so that the human world can be peaceful and fair. But I left you, a person who has already forged an immortal body, in the human world. I hope you understand my good intentions, and I also hope that you are worthy of the 2 words eternal suppression on this token that I gave you. After my wish is fulfilled, I hope that you can forever guard the peace of the human world and not let any demons or ghosts in this world extend their hands into the human world." Sir Xiaotian didn't expect Yu Qianqiu to entrust the entire human world to him. In the midst of his excitement, he found that Yu Qianqiu had already disappeared in a small town with simple folk customs in Huaxia. Yu Qianqiu quietly appeared in a luxurious mansion. He looked around and found that it was very different from when he left. On the basis of the old mansion, many nearby residences had been annexed. The old mansion still looked the same, but the new mansion with richly ornamented beams and painted rafters clearly showed the rich identity of the owner. Yu Qianqiu frowned and slowly strolled into the colorful garden. This was the place where he resettled his family. After seeing Sir Xiaotian's family in the palace, he thought of his own home, so he decided to come and have a look. As a result, he saw a rich family. A few servants in the garden saw a stranger suddenly strolling in. From his clothes, he didn't look like someone important. They were about to question him, but they found that this person had an extraordinary aura as he strolled in the garden. He didn't look like an ordinary person, so they obediently shut their mouths. Not long after, a middle-aged man who looked like a housekeeper rushed over. He looked at Yu Qianqiu, then cupped his hands and smiled apologetically. "I'm the housekeeper of the Yu Mansion. May I ask which new guest has come? Why haven't I seen you before?" It was still the Yu Mansion. Yu Qianqiu indifferently said, "Tell Yu Wuqiu to come see me. Our master is in the reception hall discussing business with a guest. Please wait for a moment, I'll go inform him." The housekeeper nodded and bowed before running away. He had wanted to find out who the other party was. Why would someone suddenly appear? Even he, the housekeeper, did not know who this person was. However, when he thought about how there were people guarding the front and back doors, as well as the fact that there were also guards guarding the house, ordinary people would not be able to barge in. Hearing the other party's tone, he did not dare to be negligent. Not long after the housekeeper left, a fat man barged into the garden. He looked to be about 17 or 18 years old, but he was followed by 4 or 5 hedonistic sons of similar age. They walked in carelessly without a care for anyone else. A servant girl passing by bowed in surprise and called out, "Eldest young master." However, the eldest young master's scoundrel friends took advantage of her. She felt so wrong that she bit her lip and wanted to cry, but she did not dare to say anything. "Eldest young master?" Yu Qianqiu raised an eyebrow as he looked at the fat man. He thought to himself, "Could this be my nephew?" His gaze gradually turned cold as he walked to the center of the road with his hands behind his back. He stared coldly at the few hedonistic sons who had barged in. When the hedonistic sons saw that someone was blocking their way, they looked at each other and stopped. The fat man looked at Yu Qianqiu with uncertainty. He could not figure out where this person had come from. He actually dared to block the eldest young master's way in his own home. Yu Qianqiu could tell that although this fat man was a hedonistic son, he was also a shrewd person. He had learned to read people's expressions at such a young age. "I am the eldest young master of the Yu residence. May I know who you are, and why are you blocking our way in the inner garden of my house?" The fat man cupped his chubby hands and asked. Yu Qianqiu said calmly, "I do not know the eldest young master of the Yu residence. I just happened to pass by the back door and saw that it was open. I wanted to come in and ask for a cup of water." The hedonistic sons were stunned. This was the first time they had encountered something like this. The fat man was even more suspicious. There were people guarding the front and back doors of his house. It did not seem like it was that easy to enter. At this moment, the housekeeper hurriedly ran back. He first bowed to the fat man, then smiled apologetically at the hedonistic sons who addressed him as Young Master Li and Young Master Zhang. Finally, he walked up to Yu Qianqiu and said in a deep voice, "Who are you? My master said that there are no new guests in the house. You do not have the right to know who I am." Yu Qianqiu looked out of the garden and chuckled coldly. "It seems that I cannot invite him."
Oh.
"You really are trespassing on private property." "Yui Wu, trespassing on private property can be reported to the authorities." "What authorities? Just beat him out of here." The group of hedonistic sons began to fan the flames. The fat man's expression immediately became twisted. He took a few steps forward and grabbed Yu Qianqiu's collar. However, he found that he could not move it at all. Before he could say anything, he saw Yu Qianqiu give him a slap at lightning speed.
Pa.
The fat man's body flew into the air. He had probably never flown so happily in his entire life. He directly crashed into the nursery garden a few meters away. The disorderly flowering shrubs immediately let out a miserable howl that sounded like a pig being slaughtered. Yu Qianqiu laughed coldly. It was already not bad that he could still scream. If it was not for the fact that he was his nephew, he would have taken his life on the spot. "You dare to hit someone? Let's go together." The group of hedonistic sons were very united. With a shout, they immediately rushed forward shoulder to shoulder. In the end, there was a series of paw-paw sounds. Figures flew everywhere. The nursery garden was filled with miserable howls that sounded like pigs being slaughtered. Just as the housekeeper went to help the eldest young master up, he saw the eldest young master, whose face was swollen like a pig's head, yell indistinctly, "Guards!
Guards!"
Where the hell did everyone go? Actually, there was no need for him to shout. A group of household servants who were guarding the house had already rushed over with their weapons. The eldest young master pointed with his finger and yelled indistinctly, "Beat him to death. I will take responsibility for beating him to death." The group of household servants immediately rushed forward, yelling and beating him with sticks like rain. Who knew that as soon as they rushed forward, a group of people would be sent flying. One by one, they lay on the ground. Ouch! 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 They didn't even see how Yu Qianqiu made his move, and they couldn't get up. The rest of the people were shocked and didn't dare to approach. They didn't know that this was because Yu Qianqiu didn't want to make a big deal out of it, because it was his own family. He also didn't want to shock the world. Otherwise, with his temper, he was afraid that not a single one of these people would survive. The fat young master and the few hedonistic sons who staggered to get up were dumbfounded. The first thought that came to their minds was that they had encountered an expert in Jianghu. It was the first time that they had seen such a handsome person. The fat young master covered half of his swollen face and looked left and right. It was obvious that these household servants were no match for this expert. Meanwhile, Yu Wuchou, who was discussing business in the flower hall, was finally alarmed by the movement here. A burst of hurried footsteps came from outside the garden. Yu Qianqiu, who had 3 strands of long beard on his face, rushed over with a group of servants. Seeing this movement, everyone fell to the ground. The servants ran to their son, who had been beaten into a pig's head, and asked what had happened. Naturally, the spearhead was pointed at Yu Qianqiu without exception. The group of servants immediately roared, and some even questioned Yu Wuchou about what had happened. How could there be someone in the family who would hurt someone? Yu Wuchou, who was already 40 years old, saw Yu Qianqiu standing in the air. How could he not recognize him? He was stunned as if he had been struck by lightning. He said, "Big, big, big." Just as he was about to call him big brother, he was glared at by Yu Qianqiu. He immediately realized that his big brother didn't want to reveal his identity. "Is this foppish fatty your son?" Yu Qianqiu pouted at the fat young master and said. Yu Wuchou immediately ran over with sweat on his head and said with embarrassment, "Big, why didn't you tell me that you were coming? Is there some misunderstanding?" When the group of servants and foppish young masters saw Yu Wuchou's appearance, they immediately looked at each other in surprise and doubt. Almost without exception, from the word big, they thought of a certain person. Businessmen were most afraid of fighting with officials, so for a moment, they all quieted down. "Haven't I already asked someone to inform you? You are very arrogant now. Even I can't invite you. I didn't expect it to be so difficult to see you, and you are such a good son." Yu Qianqiu once again pouted at the fat young master and said, "You actually dared to make a move against me, and even said that you wanted to kill me." Chapter 1145. What matters could be pleaded for and what matters could not be pleaded for, a steward would naturally be able to figure out from his master's words and actions. This time, the master was really angry. The steward sighed in his heart and stole a glance at Yu Qianqiu. He knew that he had provoked a big shot who could not be provoked. So, not only did he not plead for the young master, but he reached out and pushed the young master's fat waist, motioning him to obediently admit his mistake. The steward also understood that the young master was the master's son after all. No matter how angry the master was, he would at most punish the young master. He would not really do anything to the young master. Would he kill him? The fat young master glanced at his gang of scoundrels. As a result, everyone could see that he had provoked a big shot. Those who could bully others naturally knew better than ordinary people that they could not bully those who were more powerful than them. So, they all showed a look of, "Brother, you're on your own. Unfilial son, you dare to disobey my words?" Yu Wuchou roared again. His face was distorted with anger. The fat young master trembled with fear. In addition, the steward beside him gently pushed him. He finally covered the left side of his swollen face, trembling with fear, and weakly called out, "Father, I'll beat you to death, you unfilial son." Without saying anything, Yu Wuchou also slapped him. With a slap, the fat young master staggered, and a bright red palm print appeared on the right side of his face. But compared to Yu Qianqiu's slap, it was naturally much better. He did not fly up. He could still bear this little pain. "Kneel." Yu Wuchou pointed in front of Yu Qianqiu's feet. He wanted his son to kneel and apologize to his elder brother. What a joke. Yu Wuchou knew better than anyone that his son had suffered a little grievance. As long as his elder brother could forgive him, the benefits in the future would be unimaginable. If he really offended his elder brother, it would be too late for regrets. The group of outsiders became even more bewildered, and they were certain that Yu Qianqiu was some great figure. Otherwise, Yu Wuchou wouldn't have believed that it was his son's fault without even asking whether it was right or wrong. Those who were more quick-witted turned around and slapped their own sons, baffling them. Then, they grabbed their confused sons by the ears and dragged them to Yu Qianzhou's side. They kicked the back of his knees and forced him to kneel down. Only then did they cup their hands to Yu Qianzhou and said, "A great man does not remember the mistakes of a lowly man. My son has offended you. Please forgive him." When he took the lead, the others thought that he had recognized who it was, and in the end, they all followed suit. A series of slapping sounds rang out, and the group of good-for-nothings were all dragged over to kneel and apologize, causing the two brothers, Yu Qianzhou and Yu Wuchou, to be stunned. The fat young master was immediately dumbfounded. He did not need his father to yell again. Without saying he knelt, kneeled, and knelt said,
He not. Lord?
Yu Qianzhou suddenly understood. This group of rich landlords thought he was an official. He was too lazy to argue with these mortals. However, he made up his mind to punish the people in his family. He pointed at the fat young master and said, "You,
Come here.
The fat young master secretly glanced at his father. Seeing that his father was about to kick, he quickly got up and slowly moved over. "Which hand hit me just now?" Yu Qianzhou said indifferently. "Take it out and let me see." Yu Wuchou's pupils constricted, and he suddenly had a bad feeling. He'd witnessed his big brother's decisiveness in killing. Even though he was young all those years ago, he'd personally witnessed his big brother cleansing an entire stronghold of bandits with blood, and that scene was deeply engraved in his mind. Then he saw his son weakly stretch out a fat hand. Yu Wuchou suddenly felt his throat go dry. He wanted to say something, but he could not.
Ah!
A mournful howl echoed throughout the Yu mansion. The fat young master was already kneeling on the ground. He opened his mouth and let out a dry howl. His face was deathly pale. Yu Qianzhou had pinched his palm, and his entire right palm had already been crushed into a bloody pulp. Blood spurted out and splashed onto his friends on both sides. The group of foppish playboys were so frightened that they collapsed to the ground. Their faces turned pale in an instant. The group of rich landlords were also frightened to the point of trembling. They hurriedly dragged their sons away, afraid that they would also be killed. Yu Wuchou looked at his big brother with a pale face. His son fainted on the ground. Yu Wuchou's heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. This was his son. How could his big brother be so cruel? However, he did not dare to say or do anything. Irrelevant people, get lost. Yu Qianzhou glanced at the crowd and said. The group of rich landlords immediately cupped their hands and bid farewell to Yu Wuchou. They hurriedly grabbed their weak sons and ran away. It was also at this time that a few women who had heard the news rushed over. The woman in the lead fell to the ground and hugged her unconscious son, crying loudly. Not long after, she also fainted. The other women called out a few times, but saw that the master was standing there in a daze, as if he did not see anything. They then hurriedly called for the servants to carry the fainted mother and son away for treatment. "Find a quiet place. I have something to say to you." Yu Qianzhou turned around and said. Yu Wuchou recovered from his daze and led his big brother into the old mansion with difficulty. After entering the main hall of the old mansion, Yu Wuchou said bitterly, "My parents were afraid that you would not be able to find a place when you came back. They never agreed to let us renovate this old mansion, so they kept it in the new mansion." "Where are my parents? Are they well?" Yu Qianzhou asked with his back facing him. "Better than us children," Yu Wuchou muttered. Yu Wuchou muttered, "My parents are used to farming in Utopia, so they bought a few pieces of land at the foot of Nanshan with a few farmers to farm. They said that if you came back, they would let you go over and take a look." "What? You think I was too harsh on your son?" Yu Qianzhou turned around and asked. Yu Wuchou said, "Big brother must have his reasons for doing this." "Humph. I'm afraid that's not what you think." Yu Qianzhou stared at him and sneered. "If it wasn't for the sake of our family, I could have taken his life today. It wouldn't have been worth the effort. He has such bad habits at such a young age. It shows what kind of a father you are. If I hadn't seen and heard it, I wouldn't have dared to do this. Why are you and your sons so arrogant? Do you really think that no one in this world can deal with you? It's good that you met me today. If you fall into someone else's hands in the future, no one will be merciful. Today, I broke one of his hands so that when he does evil in the future, he will think about today's pain and have some scruples. At the same time, it's also for you to remember. I will remember Big Brother's lesson. Yu Wuchou bowed and said. In fact, he didn't think much of it in his heart. He could be considered to be a wealthy man now, and he had made friends with many influential officials. He had never seen anything that couldn't be settled with money and power. As long as he had enough money and influence, nothing was a problem. Moreover, he had an unfathomable big brother behind him. He felt that his big brother had been cultivating for a long time and was out of touch with this era. However, he only dared to think this in his heart and didn't dare to say it out loud. Yu Qianqiu squinted and stared at him for a while. A fierce look flashed across his face. After some hesitation, he took out the token with the words Yongzhen engraved on it and handed it over. Yu Wuchou's gloomy eyes immediately lit up. He knew that the thing his big brother gave him was definitely not something ordinary. He asked in excitement, "Big brother, is this for me?" Seeing his big brother nod, he quickly took it and carefully examined it. He then asked, "Big brother, this is?" "The Imperial Court's Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen owes me a favor. I asked him for this token. If the Yu clan encounters any trouble in the future, you can use this token to seek his help." Yu Qianqiu warned again. Remember, don't use this token unless you encounter a disaster that you can't resolve. It can only resolve 3 disasters for the Yu clan. After 3 times, the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen will take it back. You must remember this. To a mortal like Yu Wuchou, the reputation of the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen in the Huaxia Empire was many times greater than his big brother's. In their eyes, the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen was a true god. He was a person who stood above everyone else in the entire Huaxia Empire. With this token, he could resolve 3 troubles. This was no different from the 3 death exemption tokens given by the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen. Yu Wuchou held the token as if it was a priceless treasure. He said excitedly, I know. I heard that the reason why the current emperor was able to conquer this world was because of the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen's ability to cast beams to form soldiers. I've also heard from some merchants that the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen doesn't easily interfere with the affairs of the Imperial Court. However, if he were to speak, he could even decide the next successor to the throne. Big brother, you have such a precious thing for me instead of keeping it for yourself. It can be seen that you still have our Yu clan in your heart. I was thinking too much just now. Little brother apologizes to big brother. As he spoke, he held the token and bowed deeply 3 times. Yu Qianqiu was speechless. He didn't expect that the crying Shi Xiaotian in front of him would have such a great reputation in the secular world. His Shi clan's world was actually obtained by Shi Xiaotian's casting beams to form soldiers. Then what did he spend so much effort for? However, it made sense. Given Shi Xiaotian's status in the Shi clan, he could really decide the successor to the throne. If Shi Xiaotian objected, it would be useless no matter who in the Shi clan objected. Looking at this little brother of his who smelled like a commoner, Yu Qianqiu sighed in his heart. He didn't say anything else. It was indeed not good for him to meddle too much in the affairs of the secular world. Otherwise, how could he convince the masses? However, he had transmigrated to this family, and it was thanks to this family that he was fated to embark on the path of cultivation. It was impossible for him to abandon the family and completely ignore it. Even animals knew how to repay kindness, so how could he be dismissive of it? He didn't want to meddle in the affairs of the secular world, but he had still clenched his teeth and created this token against his will. He hoped that it would protect the Yu clan for 3 generations. Today, he had ruthlessly crippled his eldest nephew's hand in order to teach the Yu clan a lesson they would never forget. If the Yu clan cherished their fortune, they would naturally avoid using the command medallion as much as possible. In that case, The medallion might not only protect 3 generations of the Yu clan, but also 5, 6, or even more than 10 generations. On the other hand, the 3 uses of the command medallion might not even be enough for a single generation. One could imagine just how bad the character of the Yu clan was. Coincidentally, at the time of this disaster, those Jianghu masters who had received his father's kindness desperately fought a bloody path out of the thousands of soldiers and horses for him, protecting him all the way to escape. As for his family and whatnot, he did not care about them. It could be said that he had received a great retribution. After that, the general did not let him go. He swore to kill him to avenge his daughter. He led the army to chase. Only when an even larger suppression army arrived did the general stop. Seeing that the entire Yu clan had been destroyed, the terrified Yu clan naturally wanted to take revenge. Thus, he sought help from the high officials he had a good relationship with. Those high officials readily agreed. Seeing that the entire Yu clan had been destroyed, the ordinary people did not dare to say anything. When they saw that someone was leading the army to take revenge, they immediately flocked to follow. Coupled with some people with ulterior motives, an explosion was inevitable. The imperial court was afraid that the world would be in chaos. In order to stabilize the morale of the army and the people, a mere Yu clan was nothing. Now that the Yu clan's wealth had been scattered, it was even less of a problem. Moreover, there were people who wanted to seize the Yu clan's properties. Naturally, they pushed him out to appease the world. The well-informed Yu clan panicked when he heard the news. At the critical moment, he remembered the token passed down by his ancestor. Thus, with the mentality of making a desperate attempt, he took the token and went to the entrance of the palace to seek an audience with the imperial preceptor Yongzhen. The moment the token was revealed, it became extremely powerful. The imperial preceptor Yongzhen, who had long since left the secular world, issued a decree to summon him. This shocked the entire palace. This was a character that even the emperor found difficult to meet. After seeing the Yu clan and hearing that his surname was Yu, the imperial preceptor Yongzhen immediately thought of Yu Qianzhou. He then asked about the background of his ancestor. After learning that the Yu clan's grandfather was Yu Wuchou, he was even more certain that the Yu clan was related to Yu Qianzhou. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Boss gave the world to his Shi clan, but let his own clans sink into the common people. This magnanimity was something that he couldn't help but admire. After learning about the trouble he had caused, the imperial preceptor Yongzhen only frowned slightly. He immediately issued a decree to the current emperor to exterminate the rebel army and the people, restoring peace to the world. Since this all-powerful ancestor had spoken, the entire imperial court immediately quieted down. With the fastest speed and highest efficiency, the army was assembled. Within a few months, all the chaos was quelled. And the Yu clan's 3rd generation profited from the disaster. No one expected that he actually had the backing of the world's #1 expert. As a result, no one dared to touch his properties, and they all returned to the Yu clan. The ones who suffered the most were the generals and the rebellious people. The first thing the Yu clan's 3rd generation did after obtaining a new life was to cherish the memory of his ancestor. He wept bitterly in front of his ancestor's memorial tablet and thanked his ancestor for saving his life. The second thing he did was to work hard to reproduce and make up for the Yu clan's losses. At this point, the Yu clan's 3rd generation finally knew how to restrain himself. Because everyone knew that the Yu clan had a relationship with the state preceptor Yongzhen, the rise of the Yu clan was inevitable. By the time the 4th generation of the Yu clan became the head of the Yu clan's power had already reached the pinnacle of both the political and commercial realms. The result of this was that the hearts of the people were not satisfied. By the 5th generation of the Yu clan had begun to covet the imperial power. However, they were still somewhat apprehensive about the state preceptor Yongzhen. When it came to the 6th generation, it was terrible. That fellow was extremely daring and actually deceived the sovereign step by step, testing the reaction of the state preceptor Yongzhen. After seeing that the state preceptor Yongzhen had no intention of interfering, he brazenly plotted to collude with the throne. In the end, it did not work out. The sad thing was that the success of the Imperial Preceptor was also due to the failure of the Imperial Preceptor. This was because all the armies in the world were also wary of the immortal-like Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen. When they saw that someone was plotting against the throne, all the grand marshals of the army who usually listened to him immediately turned their weapons against him, and all of them sent their troops to protect the emperor. The result was obvious. However, the command medallion was put to good use again, and Yongzhen personally appeared to protect the Yu clan. This made everyone puzzled. Could this Yu clan be the illegitimate child of Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen? Why was he helping his own clan when they rebelled? As a result, the monarch was no longer the sovereign, and the subjects were no longer the subjects. Everyone started to look down on the sovereign. Only the sixth generation of the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen could do anything about it. He ran to the residence of the State Preceptor Yongzhen and cried for a few days, saying that he was the State Preceptor of the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen and couldn't help him. As a result, the State Preceptor Yongzhen became gloomy. How could the descendant of this boss endlessly torment him? In the end, the State Preceptor Yongzhen made up his mind and summoned the sixth generation of the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen. He asked him, "If you want to sit on the throne, then say that I promised your ancestor to help your Yu clan 3 times. If you want to sit on the throne, then I will help you 3 times and fulfill my promise. However, you will have to return the command medallion to me. This is the only price you have to pay. Think about it carefully and stop tormenting yourself endlessly. If you continue tormenting yourself, then the world will fall into chaos." As a result, the sixth generation of the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen bashfully expressed that he indeed had that intention. He was afraid that the State Preceptor Yongzhen wouldn't agree and was too embarrassed to say it out loud. The State Preceptor Yongzhen immediately felt a toothache. As expected of the descendant of the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen, his shamelessness was quite similar to that of the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen. As a result, he took back the command medallion and personally dealt with this matter. He called the emperor over and bluntly said, "The Shi clan's empire was actually gifted to us by the Yu clan's ancestor. My current achievements are also thanks to the Yu clan's ancestor. Now that their descendant wants us to repay this debt, we cannot refuse to pay it back. Otherwise, I won't be able to explain it to his ancestor. Prepare to abdicate. I will give you a good home." Just like that, the Yu clan finally fell into the hands of the sixth generation of the Imperial Preceptor Yu and successfully took control of the entire Xia Empire without bloodshed. The first thing the sixth generation of the Imperial Preceptor Yu did was the same as the third generation of the Imperial Preceptor Yu. However, he brought a group of descendants to kneel in front of the ancestral tablets and cried bitterly, thanking the ancestors for their great kindness. After going through all the ancestral tablets, one would realize that Yu Qianqiu's name was nowhere to be seen. There was nothing to do with Yu Qianqiu. Meanwhile, Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen gathered all the descendants of the Shi clan together. There were tens of thousands of them, and they were all brought to the Eastern Holy Land to start a new life there. After fulfilling the 3 promises, Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen actually heaved a sigh of relief. All these years, he had been bound by the 3 promises on the command medallion. That was why he had been staying in that boring imperial palace, waiting for the person who brought the command medallion to find him. He was afraid that his departure would delay his boss's matters. After fulfilling the promise, Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen floated away in the vast world. The descendants of the Shi clan also didn't know where he went at this moment. Yu Qianqiu didn't know what would happen next. If he knew, he might not have given the command medallion away. Yu Wuqiu, who was bowing to thank his big brother, suddenly heard a commotion. He raised his head and saw that his big brother was no longer there. Instead, he saw his wife barging in with a group of people. He couldn't help but feel furious. Right now, he was so regretful that his intestines were turning green. If it wasn't for the fact that he had gotten used to those beautiful sword-wielding beauties back in Utopia and had such a wonderful impression of them, he wouldn't have fallen in love with this woman at first sight. After tasting her, he realized that she was simply too shrewish. She would always bring weapons out to fight for her life. Just looking at her made his head hurt. "Where is the person who attacked my son? Get him to come out." The shrewd woman who barged in with a sword roared angrily. With a wave of her hand, a group of servants who were also holding weapons started searching for the person in the old residence. Pa. Yuwucho walked over and gave her a slap. He pointed at his stunned wife and scolded. "Is that someone you can scold? If you keep making noise, I'll divorce you." He also looked around, afraid that his big brother would be in trouble if he heard what his wife said. Unexpectedly, his wife didn't appreciate his kindness. She stomped her feet and cried, "How dare you hit me? I'll fight you to the death." She raised her sword and chased after him, causing Yuwucho to run around. A group of servants quickly came over to stop the fight. At this moment, Yu Qianqiu had already arrived at the foot of the southern mountain outside the town. He landed in a large thicket behind a house that was obviously much more luxurious than the houses of the surrounding farmers. He swept his gaze across the surrounding fields and saw an old couple in coarse clothes returning from the fields. He couldn't help but freeze. The man had a hoe on his shoulder, and the woman had a bamboo basket on her waist that contained some fresh vegetables. The two of them chatted and laughed along the way, looking very healthy. They even helped each other cross the ditches in the fields from time to time. After seeing the old couple enter the house, Yu Qianqiu still didn't move. After listening to the conversation in the house, he couldn't help but smile. When the sound of pots and pans could be heard, and smoke began to billow out from the chimney, he felt that the matters of the secular world had been resolved with the billowing smoke. Yu Qianqiu's gaze suddenly looked towards the distant horizon and gradually became fierce. He had already made up his mind. He wouldn't tolerate anyone disturbing this pure land of the mortal world, not even the supreme of the demon world, Demon King 3 Knights. The leaves gently swayed, and the people in the thicket had already disappeared. Over the ditches that the old couple had crossed, there were now stone bridges that were very sturdy and exquisite. Chapter 1147. Those who attacked from the dark had more or less an advantage, and the methods they could choose were more than those who defended passively. After Jintai and Bai Qi ran around for a while, they had already grasped the general situation of the netherworld and celestial world. The two of them immediately took action. First, they joined hands to cause a ruckus in the celestial world, destroying several large sects and causing panic among the sects in the celestial world. Suddenly, they took the risk to attack the headquarters of the Passionless Palace, almost razing the entire headquarters to the ground. The enraged Wang Qing chased after them all the way, but he was actually lured into the underworld by the two of them. Wu Feng, who heard the news, immediately came to help. After a fierce battle, Jin Tai and Bai Qi pretended to be injured and fled. Wang Qing and his son saw the two of them were injured and immediately became spirited. They chased them in the netherworld, looking like they wanted to take advantage of the two of them being injured to get rid of them. With the annihilation of the Purgatory Army and the retreat of the Red Armored Army, the Endless Horizon, the place that caused all living beings in the netherworld to tremble, had long since changed. There was only lava flowing everywhere. A few flowing lights flew past the Endless Horizon, and the enemies that were faintly discernible were about to escape into the mysterious Forbidden Area. Wu Feng, who was chasing them, laughed sharply and shouted angrily, "Jintai Bai Qi, the mysterious Forbidden Area is in front. You have nowhere to run. Today is the day you die." "The day we die?" Jintai's wild laughter came from afar. "Ignorant fools, I'll let you and your son be happy for a few days. There will be time for you to cry." Wang Qing, who was flying quickly behind Wu Feng, suddenly frowned and said, "Father, why do I feel that something is wrong? Why can't I see Bai Qi? That guy has always been known for his speed. Naturally, he ran faster than Jintai." Wu Feng's voice suddenly paused, and he stopped in the air. Amidst the rolling heat waves and the soaring red light, he shouted, "Not good. We've fallen into the trap of these two scoundrels." Wang Qing's expression changed. In the blink of an eye, he seemed to understand something and quickly turned back. The father and son looked at each other silently for a while, and their faces gradually turned pale. Without saying a word, they turned around and flew back almost without hesitation. Ha! Jean Tai's arrogant laughter came from afar again. It's too late for you to understand now. A streak of golden light was reflected back, and it chased after the father and son at an even faster speed. Golden light flashed from its body, and its disheveled golden robes were completely refurbished, and it didn't appear that it had been injured in the slightest. Suddenly, the sky above the underworld rumbled unceasingly, and the fierce sound of fighting constantly resounded between heaven and earth. Jintai relied on his faster speed to continuously chase after Wang Qing and his son. When the father and son attacked, he immediately turned around and fled. At this time, anyone could see that Jintai was stalling for time. On the way, Wu Feng finally received an urgent message from his sister, Lady Blackpool. She said that Bai Qi was on a killing spree at the exit between the underworld and the celestial world.
No one could stop him.
Now, no one dared to go near that area. She asked the father and son to quickly go and help. This confirmed the father and son's guess. Jintai and Bai Qi had pretended to be injured and set up a trap to lure the father and son. Then, Bai Qi would use his faster speed to quickly open the passage to the demon world, and Jintai would stall them to buy more time for Bai Qi. However, what the father and son could not understand was that since Bai Qi had already reached the exit between the two realms, why didn't he hurry to open the passage to the demon world? Why was he wasting time by killing people at the exit? With Bai Qi's cultivation, if the father and son were stalled here, who could stop Bai Qi from opening the passage to the demon world? Once he thought of this, he didn't have time to think about anything else. He used all his strength to defeat Queen Jean and immediately said anxiously, "Father, every passage to the demon world is blocked by many formations. Even if Bai Qi wants to open the passage to the demon world, he won't be able to do so in a short period of time. Your flying speed is faster than mine, so quickly chase after Bai Qi.
There's still time.
I will stall Jintai. Go quickly."
All right.
Wu Feng shouted and quickly disappeared into the distance with the wind god's staff. Wang Qing turned around and chased after Jintai. Trying to run? It won't be that easy. Jintai laughed evilly. He did not want to fight with Wang Qing at all. He quickly dodged Wang Qing and used his even faster speed to tangle with Wu Feng. His golden cloud rod shone brightly as it smashed towards Wu Feng. Wu Feng, who had to fight back, was so angry that he almost vomited blood. Time waits for no man. But he had no choice but to block. When Wang Qing caught up again, he shouted angrily, "You go. I'll stop him." Wang Qing's expression was serious as he flew past the two fighting. However, after fighting for a while, Jintai immediately avoided Wu Feng and chased after Wang Qing again. Just like this, the father and son were forced to fight with Jintai. They had to block as they rushed. However, Jintai's cultivation was too high, and he couldn't do anything to him. Jintai wasted a lot of time. When the father and son finally arrived at the passage between the underworld and the celestial world, they found that a large area of the passage was blocked by fog. A group of people were trying their best to break the formation. The rumbling caused the ground to tremble continuously. However, how could the hundreds of formations that Bai Qi had personally set up be compared to the motley crew? The group of people only broke through a dozen formations after a whole day. Waha! Bai Qi, you're really something. You're giving them a taste of their own medicine. Looking at this, Jintai laughed wildly. Their plan was to make use of the time difference. That was why they deliberately lured Wang Qing and his son to a remote area of the underworld so that Bai Qi could rely on his speed to buy more time to open the passage to the demon world. However, what Jintai didn't expect was that Bai Qi would come up with a stroke of genius on the spot. He learned from the people of the immortal realm and netherworld and set up a large number of great arrays on the passageway between the two realms. In turn, he blocked the pursuit of Wang Qing and his son. Seeing this, the stone in Jin Tai's heart fell to the ground. If it was as he expected, Bai Qi should have also set up many formations on the side of the celestial world to stop them. This way, opening the passage to the demon world would not have any more twists and turns. It should be in the bag. How could he not be happy? Stop him. I'll break the formation. Wu Feng shouted angrily. Wang Qing turned around and charged at the arrogant Jin Tai. The latter immediately stood not too far away, clearly wanting to continue to delay one of the father and son, not letting them work together to break the formation. A huge staff flew into the night sky, like a meteor falling from the sky. It smashed into the depths of the white mist with a boom. The ground shook violently. The people who were originally surrounding this place to break the formation did not expect Wu Feng to attack, without even giving them a warning. They were so scared that they scattered like birds and beasts to avoid being accidentally injured. No matter how powerful the defensive power of the formation that Bai Qi had set up was, it could not withstand a single strike from the Divine Wind Staff. With a single strike, the formation was broken. The Divine Wind Staff shot up into the sky again, turning into a speck of starlight that grew larger and larger before crashing down again. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Half a day later, the mist finally dispersed and the hundreds of formations were finally broken. Wang Qing, you guard the passage. Don't let that traitor come and cause trouble. Wu Feng screamed and grabbed the wind god staff, shooting into the spinning black light. However, what he didn't expect was that the moment he came out of the passage, he immediately saw the twisting power of the world spinning towards him. It was terrifyingly strong. Wu Feng was shocked and immediately understood that Bai Qi had laid down a killing formation to wait for him. In a moment of panic, he almost fell for it. Luckily, the treasure in his hand was the wind god's staff. With an angry shout, a ball of abominable black wind suddenly exploded, dispersing the huge killing force. The wind god's staff rapidly expanded, and with a boom, it directly pierced through the entire mountain, breaking apart the formation and the mountain. His figure flew out along the white light above his head and came out of the mountain. He saw the dense mist formation again, and there were still rumbling sounds outside. Clearly, there were also people breaking the formation outside. Wu Feng pointed towards the sky, without hesitation. The enormous wind god staff was like an enormous wind drill that spun rapidly and drilled into the white mist above his head. Rumble, rumble. A series of explosions rang out. After another half a day, the fog dispersed, and another 100 or so formations were broken. Wu Feng flew into the air and grabbed the wind god's staff. Ignoring the dumbfounded crowd around him, he headed straight for the immortal world's devil world's tunnel. Bai Qi, who had killed his way here, had already reached the outskirts of the passage to the demon world 3 days earlier. At this time, the obsidian light mirror in his hand was exploding with uneven black light, clearing away the messy formations along the way. For more than a day, the obsidian light mirror had not stopped operating. In the distance, a large group of people were watching this scene in a daze. However, Bai Qi's cultivation base was too high for them. They were no match for him at all. Rushing forward would be suicide. Some of the people who had rushed forward regardless of the cost were directly turned into ashes by the obsidian nether light mirror in Bai Qi's hand. No one dared to move recklessly. They could only watch helplessly, not knowing what to do. Emperor of the Underworld, quickly stop. Once the demon world is opened, you know better than us what the consequences will be. Someone shouted with tears of blood. As long as you are willing to give up on opening the passage to the demon world, we are willing to restore the original order of the celestial world and the nether world and worship you forever. Yes, yes. Countless people shouted. Emperor of the Underworld, quickly stop. Bai Qi's expression changed, as if he was moved. If he was not forced, he would not want to open the demon world again. However, he instantly calmed down, and his indifferent voice resounded through the sky. Wait until you can be the master of Wu Feng and Wang Qing, then say such words to me. Otherwise, it is no different from farting. Who can truly understand what I have done for the 3 realms for so many years? In the end, Aren't you going against me just because you say so?
Ha ha.
I would rather betray the world than let the world betray me. Why not kill all the heartless people? His voice was filled with grief and anger. The black light suddenly soared, breaking the few magic formations with all its power. A huge mountain with a steel inlaid on it appeared in the mist. Under the illumination of the black light, the accumulated dust and vines on the steel were all swept away. Dense and strange magic symbols were engraved on the steel. Seal of the Demon World. A wave of terrified exclamations came from the crowd in the distance. There were still many formations that had not been broken behind the large mountain and on both sides, but those were not important. At this time, Bai Qi could not hear the urgent shouts behind him, nor could he see the formations that had not been broken. In his eyes, there was only the metal steel, and the speed at which his chest rose and fell became somewhat hurried. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.